close your eyes for a moment. Just picture this. You wake up tomorrow, and everything you've worked for is just gone.
Everything.
Your savings vanish. Your job, poof, gone. Your home, foreclosed.
It's hard to even comprehend.
You walk down to the bank, right?
Yeah.
And the doors are shut tight. There's a handwritten sign, closed indefinitely.
Chilling.
And out on the street, you see these men, maybe they were executives last week, now they're selling their expensive watches just for a loaf of bread.
Desperation. Pure desperation.
Families burning furniture inside to keep warm. Food lines stretching for blocks, disappearing around corners.
And this wasn't some distant land, some abstract story.
Well, this was America, the land of dreams, right? Plunged into this waking nightmare.
They called it the Great Depression. It kicked off with that shocking stock market crash in October 1929, but it quickly spiraled, becoming the deepest, most widespread economic crisis the modern world had ever seen.
Deeper than anything before.
Oh, absolutely. Factories just stood silent, farms were abandoned, global trade ground almost to a halt. By 1933, get this, 1 in every 4 Americans couldn't find work. 1 in 4.
Wow.
And it wasn't just about money, you know. It was about the raw, daily struggle for survival.
It's just so hard to square that image, America, the powerhouse, the land of riches, with the kind of despair you're describing. So how does that happen? How does the richest nation on earth, riding this incredible high of prosperity, fall so far so fast? How do champagne parties turn into breadlines?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? And the short answer is, well, it didn't happen overnight. Not at all. The seeds for this crisis, they were planted long before that crash in 29.
Okay.
We're talking about a really potent mix here. Massive overconfidence, for one. Greed, definitely. Some really big policy mistakes. And underpinning it all, this unwavering, almost blind faith in the old economic way of thinking. A refusal to see the cracks that were already forming.
So the signs were there.
They were there. So let's do this. Let's rewind. Before the storm, before the panic, let's go back to a time when America was dancing, maybe a little too confidently, on top of a bubble.
Okay, let's set that scene. The 1920s in America. You've got jazz clubs buzzing with energy, right?
Oh, yeah. The Roaring Twenties.
Flapper dresses sparkling, new music hunting from radios literally everywhere. Henry Ford's Model T.
Yeah.
Suddenly, it's not just for the rich. It's everywhere.
Making car ownership a reality for millions. It was transformative.
And Wall Street felt like this giant money machine, didn't it? Just printing fortunes day after day.
Exactly. They called it the Roaring Twenties for a very good reason. The economy was absolutely booming after World War I. Factories were just churning out cars, appliances, radios like never before.
A consumer revolution almost.
Totally. And advertising was becoming this huge force, turning things people merely wanted into things they suddenly felt they needed. And then there was credit. For the first time, it was incredibly easy to get. That classic buy now, pay later idea really took hold.
Ah, the installment plan.
Precisely. It honestly felt like the party would just never end.
So people felt incredibly optimistic riding this wave. But what was really fueling that confidence, was it solid or?
Well, it was a mix. There was genuine optimism, for sure. America came out of the war incredibly strong economically. Industrial output was soaring. New tech, like electricity becoming common, assembly lines getting faster, it made production cheaper, quicker.
So real progress was happening.
Definitely. There was this real belief that growth would just keep going up and up, indefinitely. But then came the, let's call it the illusion part. Stock prices just kept climbing and climbing. It drew everyone in, farmers, teachers, factory workers, everybody wanted a piece of the action.
Thinking they could get rich quick.
Exactly. And here's the really dangerous twist. Most weren't buying stocks with their savings.
Uh-oh.
They were buying on margin, basically borrowing money to gamble on the stock market.
Borrowing to buy stocks.
Yeah, sometimes putting down as little as 10% of the stock's actual price. The rest was borrowed from the broker.
That sounds incredibly risky. How widespread was that? Buying on margin.
It was huge and incredibly risky, yes. By 1929, brokers had loaned out over $8 billion in margin debt. That's an astronomical sum for the time.
$8 billion.
Think of it like a house of cards. As long as prices kept going up, everyone felt rich, right? Your stocks were worth more than your loan. But If prices fell even just a little bit,
Then what?
the brokers would issue a margin call. They'd demand you repay the loan immediately.
And if you couldn't,
Yeah.
because the stock value had dropped?
Then your stocks were sold, often at a huge loss to cover the debt. You could be wiped out completely
Yeah.
and still owe money.
Wow. So a house of cards built on borrowed money.
Exactly. And while all this glittering was happening on Wall Street, there were real cracks forming underneath.
Like what?
Well, the farmers, for instance, they were already in deep trouble. Drowning in debt, really.
Why was that?
After World War I, global demand for grain dropped sharply. But American farmers, encouraged during the war, kept producing huge amounts. They'd taken out big loans for new tractors, more land, then prices just collapsed. But the debts, they kept piling higher and higher.
So a farm crisis was already brewing, separate from the stock market.
Absolutely. A major underlying weakness.
And the government, the people in charge. Did they see these dangers, the margin debt, the farm problem?
Well, the prevailing philosophy back then was what we call classical economics. Meaning the strong belief that markets fix themselves. Laissez-faire, government should keep its hands off, no need for much regulation.
So banks weren't tightly controlled.
Very lightly supervised. The stock market. Basically zero safety nets, no FDIC, none of that.
Just pure faith in capitalism to sort itself out.
Pretty much, an almost unshakable faith. And while Wall Street was roaring and the champagne was flowing, the real economy, the farmers, the factories, the workers, was actually slowing down. But few seemed to notice. Or maybe few wanted to look too closely.
Because the party felt too good to stop.
Who wants to think about the morning after when the party is still going strong?
Right. Okay, so the bubble's getting bigger, the cracks are widening underneath. What happened next? When did things start to wobble?
Well, by late October 1929, stock prices had actually been slipping for a few weeks already. Nothing dramatic at first, but noticeable. A few nervous investors started to sell off their shares, quietly at first.
So a bit of nervousness creeping in.
Yeah. Headlines in the papers started hinting at maybe a correction, Little dip. But the big voices on Wall Street, the bankers, the experts, they were mostly saying, stay calm, don't worry, the fundamentals are sound.
Famous last words.
You could say that. But despite the reassurances, you could kind of feel the market trembling. The confidence was fragile.
So what was the moment the dam finally broke? When did that nervousness turn into actual panic?
That moment arrived on Thursday, October 24th. History remembers it as Black Thursday.
Black Thursday. Okay.
The opening bell rings, and it's just drowned out by shouts. Sell, sell, sell. Absolute chaos on the floor. Trading volume just explodes. Nearly 13 million shares change hands that day. It completely smashed all previous records.
13 million. What was normal before that?
Maybe 3 or 4 million on a busy day, so this was unprecedented.
And the ticker tape, the thing that showed the prices.
Couldn't keep up. It fell hours behind. So traders, investors, everyone was flying blind. They had no idea what the real prices were. Panic feeds on uncertainty like that.
Total chaos. Did anyone try to stop it?
Yeah, for a moment it looked like they might. A group of major bankers and very wealthy investors, people like J.P. Morgan Jr.'s firm, they pooled their money. They deliberately started buying big blocks of blue chip stocks, the big stable companies, to try and stabilize things. Show confidence.
Did it work?
For a very brief time, it actually seemed to. The market stopped plunging quite so hard. It closed that Thursday bruised, definitely shaken, but not completely broken. People sort of breathed a collective sigh of relief. Maybe the worst was over.
It wasn't.
No. The confidence was deeply, deeply damaged. And over that weekend, fear just spread like wildfire. People talked, they worried, they read the papers.
The weekend thinking time probably didn't help.
Didn't help at all. Come Monday, October 28th, the selling started again, but this time with real force. Hard selling. The Dow Jones Index plunged roughly 13% in a single day.
13%.
And remember those margin calls we talked about?
Oh, yeah.
They started hitting investors hard. People who had borrowed heavily suddenly got demands for cash it just didn't have. Many were forced to liquidate everything they owned, sell their stocks at any price, just to try and cover their debts.
Which, of course, just pushed prices down even further.
Exactly. A vicious downward spiral.
And then came Tuesday, the day we all remember from the history books.
Tuesday, October 29th, 1929. Black Tuesday. If Thursday was a shockwave, Tuesday was the earthquake that brought the whole building down.
What happened?
Just pure pandemonium, utter panic. A staggering, unbelievable 16 million shares were traded, another record completely shattered.
16 million in one day.
Phones on the trading floor were jam solid. Brokers couldn't even answer them. Clerks were literally stuffing sell order slips into trash cans because they physically couldn't process them fast enough.
Oh, my God.
Stocks that had made families feel wealthy just days before suddenly had no buyers at any price. They were worthless on paper. Billions, true billions in paper wealth just evaporated, gone in a matter of hours.
It's just mind-boggling, that speed, that scale.
It truly is. And the margin debt was the accelerator. When prices collapsed that hard, brokers had no choice but to demand repayment.
People couldn't pay.
Most couldn't. So the brokers were forced to dump those margin shares onto the market, whatever the price, just to recover something. This flood of forced selling drove prices down even lower, even faster.
So people lost everything and often still owed money on stocks that were now worthless.
Precisely. They were ruined, and in debt besides. The very leverage, the borrowed money that had fueled the party, now magnified the crash into an absolute catastrophe.
What was the final tally in terms of the market drop?
Well, from its peak back in September to the low point right after the crash in November, the Dow Jones Index lost nearly half its value.
Half.
But it didn't stop there. It kept drifting lower, grinding down, all the way through 1930, 31, into 32. By the summer of 1932, the market had lost almost 90% of its value from the 1929 peak. 90%.
Unbelievable. Just wiped out.
For millions of ordinary Americans who had put their hopes and savings into the market, it didn't just dip, it essentially disappeared.
So looking back, was the crash itself the start of the Great Depression? Or was it more like a symptom?
That's a really important distinction. The crash itself didn't cause all the suffering that followed, not directly. But what it did was act like a massive shock to the system. It absolutely shattered confidence. It destroyed an enormous amount of wealth overnight. And crucially, it exposed just how incredibly fragile the whole economic structure already was. All those underlying weaknesses we talked about.
Yeah.
Think about it. When fear takes over like that, what happens? Credit dries up instantly. Nobody wants to lend. When credit dries up, businesses can't borrow to operate or expand, so they cut back. They lay people off.
And banks.
Banks start to wobble, especially the weaker ones. People hear rumors, they get scared, they start pulling their money out.
Bank runs.
Exactly. So the crash wasn't the whole fire, but it was definitely the spark that lit the very dry timber that had been stacked up for years.
So all those things, the reckless margin debt, the farmers already in crisis, the weak, unregulated banks, their almost religious faith in markets fixing themselves.
Yeah, they all suddenly caught fire at once. The crash ignited all those vulnerabilities.
And the panic on Wall Street quickly spread outwards.
Absolutely. Over the next few years, that financial panic transformed into a deep, grinding economic depression. Banks would fail by the thousands, factories would close, unemployment would soar to unimaginable levels. The panic on Wall Street became hunger on Main Street. What began as a stock market crash was about to engulf the entire country and, indeed, much of the world.
So the crash happens. Confidence is shattered. People wait for things to bounce back, right? That's what markets usually do.
They waited. Everyone hoped for a rebound, but it just never came. Instead of bouncing back, the floor just completely gave way. That's when the true Great Depression, the long, grinding hardship, really began. Not just on Wall Street, but in every town, every home across America.
What was the next big domino to fall after the stock market? What spread the crisis nationwide?
Definitely the banks. The banking system was incredibly vulnerable.
Why specifically?
Well, crucially, back then, there was no FDIC, no federal deposit insurance. If your bank failed, your savings were just gone. Poof.
No safety net at all for depositors.
None. So imagine you hear a rumor, just a rumor that your local bank might be in trouble. What do?
You run down there and try to get your money out fast?
Exactly. And everyone else hears the same rumor or sees the line forming, and they do the same thing. A bank run.
But the bank doesn't have everyone's cash just sitting in the vault.
Right. Banks loan most of it out. That's how they make money. They keep some reserves, but not nearly enough if everyone demands their money back at once. So when these runs happened, even sound banks could be pushed over the edge. They simply ran out of cash and had to close their doors.
How many banks failed?
It was catastrophic. Between 1930 and 1933, over 9,000 banks in the United States failed.
9,000.
Yeah, think about that. Millions of families saw their life savings, everything they'd worked for, just vanish overnight. Wiped out.
Devastating. And with the banks collapsing and credit freezing up,
Yeah.
what happened to businesses?
Factories just shut down. If you can't get loans to buy raw materials or pay workers, and if nobody has money to buy your products anyway, you close your doors.
Right.
Industrial production in the U.S. plummeted by nearly half between 29 and 33.
Half.
Yeah, and that meant jobs just disappeared. By 1933, as we said, 1 in 4 American workers was unemployed. Officially, the real number, including people underemployed or who had given up looking, was likely even higher.
And in some big industrial cities.
Even worse, Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, some cities saw unemployment rates hit 50% or even more. Half the workforce with no job.
It's unimaginable. People who had good, steady jobs, maybe just months before,
Suddenly found themselves standing in line for food, for basic survival.
the breadlines and soup kitchens we see in the photos.
Yes, exactly. They stretched for blocks in cities across the country, often run by churches, charities, sometimes even, ironically, by organized crime figures like Al Capone in Chicago, partly as a PR move.
Capone running soup kitchens. Wow.
Yeah, but imagine the feeling, the profound humiliation. Men who maybe wore suits to an office job just a year earlier, now standing with their heads down, waiting for a single bowl of soup, maybe some bread.
The dignity just stripped away.
Utterly stripped away for so many.
What about outside the cities? What was happening in rural America? We mentioned the farmers were already struggling.
They were definitely not spared. In many ways, rural America got hit even harder, and by a double blow. First, the economic side. Remember those collapsing crop prices and crushing debts? That only got worse. Foreclosures skyrocketed, farmers lost their land.
And the second blow.
Nature itself seemed to turn against them. The Dust Bowl.
Ah, the Dust Bowl. Tell us about that.
It was an ecological disaster layered on top of the economic one. A decade of severe drought hit the Great Plains, combined with the results of years of poor farming practices, plowing up native grasses that held the soil down.
So the soil just blew away.
Literally, vast stretches of formerly fertile plains turned into barren wastelands. People talked about black blizzards, massive dust storms that choked the air, buried homes and farm equipment, killed livestock. It was apocalyptic.
Forcing people off their land.
Absolutely. Tens of thousands of families, maybe hundreds of thousands, were driven off their farms. They packed everything they owned, if they had anything left, into falling apart cars, often called jalopies.
And headed west.
Headed west, mostly towards California, chasing rumors of agricultural work, picking fruit or vegetables. They became known, often dismissively, as Okies, even though they came from many states, not just Oklahoma.
And what did they find in California? Was it the promised land?
Sadly, no. Often they were met with hostility. Locals resented the influx of poor migrants competing for scarce jobs. They lived in desperate poverty in makeshift camps, often exploited for their labor.
So we've got hunger in the cities, dust storms, and displace me in the countryside. What was the government doing initially? President Hoover.
Well, President Hoover, he held very firmly to the traditional economic thinking of the time.
The laissez-faire idea again?
Yes. He believed the government's main role was to balance its budget, encourage voluntary cooperation, and let the markets naturally self-correct. He resisted large-scale direct federal relief or intervention.
And did that work? Did things self-correct?
No, they didn't. In fact, things just got demonstrably worse during those first few years. His approach, rooted in that old thinking, simply wasn't enough for a crisis of this magnitude.
And was this just happening in America? Or did the Depression spread?
Oh, it absolutely spread. It became a global catastrophe. The U.S. crash choked off the flow of American loans and investment that many European countries, especially Germany, had relied on to rebuild after World War I.
So it hit Europe hard, too.
Very hard. Germany was already struggling under the weight of war reparations payments imposed after the war. When American credit dried up and the global economy seized, German banks failed, unemployment soared there too. And that widespread economic despair, that feeling of hopelessness,
Yeah.
it became incredibly potent political fuel
Fuel, fair
for
enough.
extremist movements. In 1933, a desperate Germany, reeling from the Depression's impact, turned to a man promising radical change, national revival: Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party.
Wow, so the Great Depression played a direct role in the rise of Hitler.
A very significant role. It created the conditions of misery and anger that extremist ideologies could exploit.
And elsewhere in the world.
Similar impacts, different forms. In Japan, the economic crisis fueled the ambitions of militarists who argued Japan needed to seize control of resources and markets in Asia by force. In Latin America, the prices of their key exports, coffee, sugar, metals, just collapsed on the world market, devastating their economies. In places like British India, demand for exports like jute and cotton plummeted, leading to widespread hardship, even starvation, among peasant farmers.
So it truly was a global depression. What happened to international trade?
It basically collapsed. By 1933, the total value of world trade had shrunk by 2/3 compared to 1929.
2/3. How did nations react?
They panicked and turned inward. Countries threw up high tariff taxes on imported goods trying to protect their own industries. Many abandoned the gold standard, which had helped stabilize international currencies. It effectively slammed the brakes on and even reversed what some historians called the first era of globalization that had been building before World War I. Protectionism became the rule.
But you mentioned earlier there was one major country that seemed sort of insulated from all this.
Yes, a fascinating and historically crucial exception: the Soviet Union.
Under Stalin. Why were they different?
Primarily because they weren't really integrated into the global capitalist economy. Their economy was centrally planned, run by the state according to Stalin's ambitious five-year plans, focused entirely on rapid industrialization within the USSR. They didn't have a Wall Street speculating on stocks. They weren't tied to the gold standard in the same way. They didn't have private banks that could fail and cause runs.
So from the outside, while the capitalist world was collapsing,
The Soviet Union, at least according to its own propaganda and to many observers, seemed stable, even progressing. No mass unemployment, factories were being built, often through brutal means, but they were being built.
and how did that perception play out?
It had a huge impact. To many workers, intellectuals, and others disillusioned by the failures of capitalism during the Depression, communism suddenly looked like a viable alternative, maybe even a beacon of stability and hope. That perception profoundly shifted global politics and the ideological battle between capitalism and communism for decades to come.
Let's bring it back to the human level again. Try to really put ourselves there. You're standing in that line, the one wrapping around the block. The air smells maybe of boiled cabbage from the soup kitchen. Your shoes have holes. Your coat is thin against the wind. You used to have a decent job maybe. A factory, a store, an office. Now, this line is your only hope for a meal today.
That was the crushing daily reality for millions. The breadlines, the soup kitchens we talked about, run by churches, charities, even gangsters like Capone trying to gain some public goodwill.
And the shame.
This shame was profound, especially for men who were traditionally seen as the breadwinners, wearing their worn-out suits, the last vestiges of their former lives, standing in line for charity. It was deeply wounding to their pride. Remember, by 33, 25% unemployment nationwide. 1 in 4 people who wanted work couldn't find it. No income. Often, no prospect of finding any soon.
And those pictures we see of makeshift shacks built out of scrap.
What were those places?
Those were the Hoovervilles, bitterly named after President Hoover, who many blame for not doing enough.
So what were they like?
Just collections of shanties, really.
Yeah.
Thrown together from anything people could find: scrap wood, hammered out tin cans, pieces of cardboard, old car parts. They sprang up on the edges of cities, in vacant lots, sometimes even in public parks like Central Park in New York.
Families living in these. Whole families crammed into tiny, one-room shacks. No running water, no sanitation, obviously no electricity. In the winter, people burn anything flammable. They could scavenge old tires, newspapers, trash, just trying to stay warm. Life wasn't just about poverty. It was about a constant grinding lack of basic dignity.
Yeah.
Humiliating.
And then there were the people fleeing the Dust Bowl. We talked about the Okies.
Yes, those farm families literally choking on dust, seeing their livelihoods blow away. They loaded what little they had left into those beat-up old cars and trucks and headed west, mostly to California, chasing that dream of work, any work.
And the reality they found.
Often it was hostility and more hardship. They weren't always welcomed. They were seen as competitors for scarce jobs, a burden on local resources. Camps overflowed. Families ended up living in tents, under bridges, working grueling hours picking fruit or cotton for pennies, often exploited by growers.
John Steinbeck wrote about this, didn't he?
He captured it perfectly, the pain and the resilience, in his novel The Grapes of Wrath. It became the iconic story of that migration and struggle. Required reading, really, to understand that part of the Depression.
Amidst all this hardship, the hunger, the Hoovervilles, the Dust Bowl,
Yeah.
how did families actually cope? How did they survive day to day?
Any way they possibly could. Survival became the main focus. People relied on ingenuity and community. There was a lot of bartering. Maybe you had some chickens, so you traded eggs for shoes, or you offered your labor for a meal.
Making do?
Exactly. Women became absolute masters of stretching food. Making a pot of soup or stew from a few beans and potatoes last for days. Kids often had to quit school to find small jobs, anything to bring in a few cents. Some older boys and young men even took to riding freight trains illegally across the country, looking for temporary work wherever they could find it. Hobos, they were sometimes called.
And the psychological toll,
Yeah.
the shame you mentioned.
It was immense, absolutely crushing for many. In that era, there was a very strong belief in self-reliance. So when people lost their jobs or farms, they often blamed themselves.
Even though it was a massive systemic failure.
Even then, they felt like they had failed their families. We saw suicide rates climb significantly in the early years of the Depression. And tragically, some fathers, overwhelmed by the shame and inability to provide, simply disappeared, abandoned their families.
That's heartbreaking.
It truly is. But, and this is important, amidst all that darkness, there was also incredible resilience. People didn't just give up.
How did that resilience show itself?
Families doubled up in apartments or houses, sharing the little they had. Neighbors helped neighbors. Communities found ways to keep spirits up. They organized potlucks, barn dances, card games, simple things to maintain social connection and offer a brief escape. People planted thrift gardens in any patch of available land. They repaired old clothes, sometimes even sewed new ones out of patterned feed sacks. They learned, by necessity, to live with much less and to share what remained.
So it wasn't just an economic story. It was profoundly human.
Absolutely. The Depression wasn't just an economic collapse. It was a deep human test. A test of pride, of dignity, of compassion, and ultimately a testament to the strength of community when everything else falls apart.
It really shows that when the big systems fail, what's left is people relying on each other.
That's often the most vital lesson, isn't it?
Okay, we've painted a pretty bleak picture of the devastation, the breadlines, the lost farms, the failed banks, widespread suffering. But here's maybe an uncomfortable question to ask. In a crisis this huge, this widespread, did everyone suffer? Or were there actually some people, some groups, who managed to come out ahead?
That's a really sharp question, and it touches on an uncomfortable truth about economic crises. No, they don't affect everyone equally. While millions were losing everything, a crisis like this often shifts power, it shifts wealth, it creates certain opportunities for a select few.
Opportunities in the middle of the Depression.
Yes, think about it this way. Who benefits when prices collapse? People who have cash.
Right. Cash is king in a downturn.
Exactly. So wealthy individuals, maybe some corporations, who weren't loaded down with debt and had substantial liquid cash reserves, they were positioned to take advantage. When stock prices hit rock bottom, when factories went bankrupt, when farms were foreclosed on, these cash-rich players could step in and buy up those assets, valuable factories, prime farmland for pennies on the dollar.
So they were basically snapping up bargains while everyone else was losing their shirts.
Pretty much. Imagine buying a factory for a tiny fraction of what it costs to build, or thousands of acres of land for next to nothing. For them, in a very grim and opportunistic sense, the Depression was like a massive clearance sale.
Wow. So the rich could actually get richer.
Some certainly did. Surviving banks also benefited. As thousands of smaller, weaker banks failed, the larger, more stable ones that weathered the storm could absorb their assets and customers, consolidating immense power in the financial sector.
And what about businesses? Did any thrive?
Well, thousands upon thousands of small businesses went under, obviously, but some of the big industrial giants actually managed not just to survive, but to expand their market share. Companies like General Electric, DuPont, Procter& and Gamble, they were large enough, diversified enough, and managed aggressively enough to cut costs, find efficiencies, and even innovate.
Innovate during the Depression.
Yeah, take Procter& and Gamble, for example. They needed to keep selling soap, right? They pioneered a new form of advertising, sponsoring daytime radio dramas targeted at housewives.
Radio dramas sponsored by soap companies.
Exactly. And that's where the term soap opera comes from, a marketing innovation born directly out of the economic necessity of the Depression.
That's fascinating. A little bit of trivia there.
Right.
What about investors? Did anyone make money betting against the market? The short sellers.
A few did, yes. There were investors, known as short sellers, who had bet that stock prices would fall. Some legendary figures like Jesse Livermore reportedly made fortunes during the crash itself. But, and this is a big, but it was incredibly risky and difficult. Most people who tried to short the market actually lost everything. You needed nerves of steel, perfect timing, and often deep pockets to ride out the volatility. Very few individuals managed it successfully.
So not a reliable path to riches for most.
Definitely not. More reliable, relatively speaking, were things like government bonds. People trusted the government's ability to pay its debts. And certain utility stocks companies providing essential services like electricity, gas, water held up better than most because people still had to pay for those things even in hard times. Safe havens, relatively speaking.
Okay, so individuals with cash, some big corporations, maybe bondholders. Anyone else benefit?
Well, shifting gears a bit, you could argue there were ideological winners too.
How so?
As we discuss, while capitalism seemed to be failing spectacularly in the West, the Soviet Union's communist system, at least on the surface, appeared stable, even dynamic. That perception, whether entirely accurate or not, gave communism a huge boost in prestige worldwide. It seduced many intellectuals, artists, and workers who were disillusioned with the chaos of the Depression. It fueled the growth of socialist and communist movements globally.
So the crisis in capitalism gave its main rival a big boost.
A huge boost. But perhaps the biggest winner of all wasn't a person, a company, or even a country.
What was it then?
It was an idea, a fundamental shift in thinking.
Which idea was that?
The idea that government must play an active role in managing the economy and protecting its citizens when markets fail. The old laissez-faire orthodoxy. The Depression effectively killed it, or at least severely wounded it. This new thinking that government intervention is necessary would define the next era of economics. It paved the way for President Roosevelt's New Deal, the creation of social safety nets, and the rise of Keynesian economics. That idea was the ultimate winner.
That's a powerful thought. The biggest winner was a change in philosophy.
Yeah, a paradigm shift, really, born out of immense suffering, but transformative nonetheless.
So let's get to that transformation.
Right.
By March 1933, you paint this picture of America just on its knees.
Absolutely. Banks were still failing daily. Unemployment was at its peak. Families were starving. National confidence was completely shattered. Fear was pervasive.
And then?
Then a new president takes office. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR. And in his inaugural address, he delivers that iconic line, broadcast over the radio to millions of anxious Americans. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Powerful words. But were they just words?
No, he backed them up with immediate, decisive action. He brought this incredible energy and optimism and launched what became known as the New Deal.
The New Deal. We hear that term all the time. What was it, fundamentally?
It wasn't just one single policy. It was this sweeping, ambitious, sometimes experimental collection of programs, legislation, and reforms, all designed with two main goals: rescue the collapsing economy and provide direct relief to the suffering American people. Rescue and relief.
Okay, what were some of the key parts of the New Deal?
Well, right off the bat, he declared a bank holiday, shut down all the banks temporarily.
Scary, maybe, or reassuring.
A bit of both, probably, but it stopped the panic.
Yeah.
Then Congress quickly passed the Emergency Banking Act, which allowed the government to inspect the banks and reopen only the ones that were financially sound. This helped restore confidence. Then came the Glass-Steagall Act. Hugely important. That's what created the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance
The
Corporation.
deposit insurance we have today.
Exactly. Guaranteeing that if your bank failed, your savings up to a certain amount would be safe. That single act did immense good in restoring trust in the banking system. Never again would people lose their life savings overnight like that.
That's huge. What else? What about jobs?
Massive focus on jobs. The New Deal launched huge public works projects. Things like the WPA, Works Progress Administration, and the CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps. They put millions of unemployed Americans back to work building roads, bridges, dams, schools, parks, planting trees. Infrastructure we still use today. It gave people not just income, but also purpose and dignity again.
And longer-term security.
That was crucial, too. The Social Security Act of 1935, maybe the most enduring legacy of the New Deal. It created a national system of old-age pensions, unemployment insurance, and aid for dependent children and the disabled. A fundamental social safety net that hadn't existed before.
So the government wasn't just watching anymore.
Not at all. Under FDR and the New Deal, the role of the federal government fundamentally changed. It wasn't just a spectator or a referee applying old rules. It became an active player, intervening directly in the economy to stabilize it and protect citizens. A massive shift.
It must have felt absolutely revolutionary compared to the hands-off approach before Hoover and even Hoover's limited actions.
Oh, it was completely revolutionary for its time. Remember that old economic idea? Government stays out, markets fix themselves.
Yeah, laissez-faire.
The Great Depression basically buried that idea, at least in its purest form. It proved spectacularly wrong in the face of such a deep crisis. And right around this time, a brilliant British economist, John Maynard Keynes, was developing a new theory that explained why.
Keynes. We still talk about Keynesian economics today. What is his core idea?
Keynes argued that in a severe downturn, when private spending and investment collapse, when businesses aren't investing and people aren't buying, the economy can get stuck in a downward spiral. He said that in those situations, the government must step in and spend money, even if it means borrowing, running deficits to stimulate demand, create jobs, and keep the economy from completely seizing up. Government spending as a balancing wheel.
So the opposite of balancing the budget during a crisis.
Exactly, counter-cyclical spending. That thinking, Keynesianism, profoundly reshaped economic policy not just in the U.S., but around the world for decades after the Depression.
So the big question, did the New Deal actually end the Great Depression?
That's debated by economists and historians even today. The honest answer is probably not entirely by itself, no. What the New Deal absolutely did was provide crucial relief. It eased the terrible suffering for millions. It restored a vital sense of trust and hope in government and in the future. It stopped the downward spiral.
But it didn't fully fix the economy.
Unemployment remained stubbornly high throughout the 1930s, though much lower than its peak. The full economic recovery, ironically, only really arrived with the massive government spending and industrial mobilization needed for World War II.
War spending finally ended it.
That seems to be the consensus, yes. The sheer scale of spending for the war effort finally wiped out unemployment and got factories running at full capacity again. But, and this is critical, even if it didn't single-handedly end the Depression, the New Deal fundamentally and permanently changed America.
How so? What are the lasting legacies?
Well, we still have Social Security, that bedrock safety net. We have the FDIC protecting bank deposits. We have stronger regulations on the stock market, like the SEC, also a New Deal creation. We have established rights for workers to organize unions. And perhaps most profoundly, we have the widely accepted idea, the principle, that the government has a responsibility, a duty, to intervene to protect its citizens from the worst ravages of economic crisis. That expectation remains.
So the Depression wasn't just a disaster. It forced a rethinking, a rebuilding.
Exactly. And that brings us to the lessons. What does this harrowing episode from nearly a century ago tell us today? I think the Great Depression acts like a stark, haunting mirror. It reflects back some timeless truths.
Such as?
That markets, left completely to their own devices, aren't perfect or always self-correcting. That unchecked speculation and overconfidence, that bubble mentality can be incredibly dangerous, even deadly. And maybe most importantly, that economic systems can fail. And when they do, it's not just numbers on a page, it's human dignity, human survival that hangs precariously in the balance.
But the mirror also shows resilience, right? You
Yeah.
mentioned people rebuilding.
Absolutely. Amidst the darkness, people did find ways to cope, to help each other, to endure. They rebuilt their lives, and eventually the nation rebuilt trust. Trust in each other, trust in its institutions, and critically, trust in the possibility of a better future.
Which leads us to a final thought, maybe for everyone listening.
Yeah. Today, we face our own set of complex global crises. We've got climate change, we have persistent inequality, we have disruptions from technology changing jobs. The challenges are different in form, but maybe similar in scale. So the core question that echoed out of 1929 comes back to us, doesn't it? Have we truly learned the profound, painful lessons of the Great Depression?
Or are we, maybe in different ways, still dancing on bubbles, pretending, hoping they'll never burst?
It's the question we have to keep asking ourselves.
Wow. What an absolutely incredible and sobering journey we've taken.
Yeah.
Thank you for guiding us through that. We went from the glittering, almost manic energy of the Roaring Twenties
Yeah, the highest highs.
right down into the absolute depths of despair. The breadlines, the Dust Bowl, the human suffering,
Lowest lows.
and then slowly rising again with the bold, sometimes controversial, but ultimately transformative ideas of the New Deal.
It really reshaped the country.
It's such a powerful reminder, isn't it, that even when massive systems fail, that human resilience, that sense of community can endure, and that maybe, just maybe, we can learn vital lessons about how to build better, more stable systems, about regulation, about safety nets.
Hopefully.
So, as you, our listener, go about your day, we really hope you'll carry that final question with you. Mull it over. Think about its relevance right now, in our world, with the challenges we face today. Are we truly learning from history? Or are we perhaps doomed to repeat some version of it if we're not careful?
A crucial thought to consider.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We truly appreciate you spending your time with us, exploring this crucial piece of history.
Yeah, thanks everyone for listening.
We look forward to exploring another fascinating topic with you again very soon. Take care.